Welcome to the latest episode of Journey to Marvel's Infinity War. Each week in 2018, I'm re-reviewing one movie in the MCU leading up to Avengers Infinity War, except for this week where I'm going to re-review two movies in the MCU. Today we're talking about Spider-Man Homecoming, and on Friday I'm going to drop my Thor Ragnarok review. They moved Avengers Infinity War up 1 week, and that means I had to double up one of the weeks, and this is the week where that is going to happen. Now before we get started, go ahead and tell me down below in the comments section, what did you think about Spider-Man Homecoming? Did you love this version of the character? Did you hate this version of the character? Did you think they got too weird with the spider suit and all that fun stuff? I'd love to have a nice lively discussion about this version, so go ahead and join me down in the comments section. If you're new to these re-review videos, the way they work is I give a little background on the movie, then I give my review in the normal sense of the way, then I talk about the MCU connections, and I close out by sharing some of you guys' take on the movie using the Stardust app. With that said, let's go ahead and get started talking about the background on this movie. When it comes to Spider-Man Homecoming, there's one thing you gotta talk about. We never thought this movie was going to happen. We never thought that the MCU is going to get to play around in the Spider-Man sandbox. If you're unfamiliar with essentially what happened with Marvel Comics, is they had some financial troubles back in the late 90s. And so they sold off the rights to various different characters. And so like X-Men, Fantastic Four went to Fox, and Sony got Spider-Man. And then they made a Spider-Man movie back in 2002, and it made insane amounts of money. It was one of the biggest movies of all time. Spider-Man 2 comes out. It makes an insane amount of money, beloved by people. They make Spider-Man 3, and while it hasn't had the best reputation over history, Spider-Man 3 made an insane amount of money for Sony. And so then when the Marvel Cinematic Universe started 10 years ago, Sony was very happy to keep Spider-Man to themselves and would have no interest in wanting to sell the rights back because it was making them a lot of money. And then they made Amazing Spider-Man, and it did okay. It didn't do horribly. People didn't hate it. And then they did Amazing Spider-Man 2, where they put enormous amounts of money into marketing that movie. They were pumping Amazing Spider-Man 2 up as the launch of their Spider-Man cinematic universe. They announced Sinister Six movie. They had all these spin-offs they were planning on doing. They were talking about doing an Aunt May movie or something like that. I mean, they had all these ideas that they were talking about doing. They put Amazing Spider-Man 2 out there, and it didn't bomb. Like, people talk about it as if it bombed. It didn't. It really didn't. But considering how much money they spent on the movie and how much they spent marketing it, they spent so much money marketing this movie, and then comparatively, it did not live up to the money that they were expecting to make off of it. But more importantly, people didn't like it. It was not received well. It has its fans, but the general consensus is that Amazing Spider-Man 2 is not the movie people wanted to launch this cinematic universe. Running parallel to that, Sony, the parent company, not Sony the film division, but Sony the main company, was having really big financial trouble. And there were actually some issues as well with the main Sony company, and there's some leaks going on. And there was just a lot of turmoil kind of happening at Sony around 2014, 2015. Still, a bunch of us thought, there's no way that they're going to sell the rights to Spider-Man. This is their guy. Like, when a Spider-Man movie makes $700 million for them, people go, oh, that didn't do as well as it should have. That's how much money Spider-Man movies make for them. Even Spider-Man movies not well received make $700 million for Sony. But because the climate was just right, and Sony and the Amazing Spider-Man had a branding issue, and the MCU is the best brand in cinema right now, and the MCU would love to have access to Spider-Man. Sony needs to get over this brand issue, so eventually the two teamed up, and they announced some stuff in 2015, the thing that I never thought was going to happen. So many others never thought was going to happen, and they cut a deal. And the first appearance was going to be in Captain America Civil War. And we were going to get another rendition of Spider-Man inside of the MCU that's both Marvel Studios Disney and Sony at the same time. And this is that movie. The magic movie that never should have happened, but did. And now let's talk about that movie, and we'll kick it off talking about the good. The thing I love about this movie is they found a way to tell, yet again, a new type of MCU story. And what I mean by that is Marvel movies tend to have a similar vibe to them. They've nailed having a tone that stretches across many different films. And comic book movies these days have gotten a little bit of a bad rap for all of them try to out-epic the last one. And there's so many sky beams, so many villains threatening to blow up cities, lifting cities up into the sky, invading armies of faceless bad guys. So many movies kind of using these same sorts of third act tropes, upping the epicness. And then this movie came along, and it absolutely feels like a Marvel movie. It absolutely ties into the MCU, but it's such a smaller scale story, and I just loved that about this movie. And it felt right. It even tied in with some of the themes of the movie so perfectly as they're trying to have this lesson from Tony Stark to Spider-Man of stop trying to be an Avenger that's trying to save the world. Where there's even a line in the movie where Tony Stark's like, just be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's like, hey, you've got the powers. You don't need to shoot to be on the superstar team. You don't need to get on the fast track to superhero superstardom. Just be a hero where you're at. And so it all tied together so well for a movie that's so distinct and a unique flavor. And it's not just because the scale of it's so much smaller because of the nature of the villain and the scheme in the film. It's also because it's a high school movie. They decided to make the most high school Peter Parker that we've had yet. And other movies have had Peter Parker in high school, even throughout the movie. But this one, I mean, it just goes into the world of this Peter Parker in his time in high school. We're sitting in the cafeteria with him, with his buddies, and his friends like, hey man, let's build the Lego Death Star tonight. Things that are just so nerdy and quirky and weird, and focus on the fact that even high schoolers still play with Legos sometimes. And so he's doing things like that. He's competing in the decathlete and things like that, where that's such a high school thing to do, and he's trying to figure out how to do all this without his aunt figuring out what's going on, and he's lying about an internship to kind of hide up the fact that what's kind of going on. There's school crushes, there's the homecoming dance that ties into the title of the movie. So many things about this movie are just distinct inside of the MCU because they told a high school story, and they told a story that's much smaller scale than anything else that we've talked about in the MCU thus far, and our protagonist being the youngest feels the youngest. From there, let's move on to our characters. As I've said in almost every single one of these reviews, impeccably cast movie. Just wonderful the way they managed to find new faces that we haven't really seen before and find faces that we've seen many times before and perfectly blended together. So let's start off with Tom Holland, our star of the movie. And we've had two different Spider-Men over the last 15 years. And so Tom Holland's following up a lot of talent, a lot of beloved characters in doing this. And he just found that way to bring this naivety, this simplicity to the role, while also in another sense, he's the most physically competent of the people that we've seen play the role. And what I mean by that is if you've ever seen this clip of him on I think with the lip sync battle show where he's singing Rihanna songs and stuff like that. This guy can move. This guy is an actual physical specimen that can pull off parkour and move with fluidity. And he brings that to this movie as a guy that's a totally nerdy, dorky high schooler, but at the same time has superhero powers. And so he's got naivety, he's got the physicality to it, he's got a really nice sense of humor to him. He pulls off being a high schooler. He feels like kind of this fun, quirky, charming, goofy person that you would know that doesn't have a good grasp on what's going on around him. It's not that he's stupid, he's very smart, but he's still learning how the world works. He hasn't figured out, just because you were called in for one thing doesn't mean that you're a superstar now. It doesn't mean that, all these things he just doesn't get are such high school things that he brings to this, and you buy it about him. Next up, let's go with Aunt May, Marissa Tomei. One of the more, in a sense, controversial castings of the movie, because typically they've gone Aunt May with 60, 70-year-old old lady. Sally Field at the time was like, well, she doesn't look like Aunt May as we've seen her before. And they go, with Marissa Tomei, she might be in her 50s, but she's still really pretty. She looks great still, even though she's in her 50s now. And so, of course, the internet aptly titled her Hot Aunt May because it's a fair name for her. She's hot Aunt May in this movie, and they have a ton of fun with that. So controversial casting, but I don't know if it's just me. I've always found it odd that Aunt May's been portrayed as such an old woman, because that she comes off like Grandma May. She doesn't come off like an aunt who would be parent age, which would be late 40s, early 50s. She comes off like a grandma that would be late 60s, 70s. That always struck me a little bit odd, how old she seemed in the Raimi ones and in a lot of the comic books as well. So I don't really have a problem at all with Aunt May being an age-appropriate Aunt May, especially given she's 50 years old. She'd be a little bit on the older age for a lot of high school parents. And so for me, she's of course a great talent. And with what they did with her, acknowledging the fact that she's hot Aunt May and building that into the script and her relationship with Tony Stark, even having some little winks at the camera because there's a history between Marissa Tomei and Robert Downey Jr. All that's a ton of fun. From there, let's move on to Robert Downey Jr. We get a little bit of Iron Man in the movie, and I just love this use of Iron Man. And I hope, I'm fingers crossed, that Iron Man doesn't die in Infinity War. I know the odds are against me on this. There's a good chance he's not going to be around much longer. But I love this use of the character and finding a way to have him being involved in things, but not having to be the guy that's in the suit. And that's what he's been talking about doing, going all the way back to, Iron Man 3. He's trying to get out of the suit, very much so. And so I think it ties in well to have him as this person that's seeing talent and saying, hey, you're really good at this. Hey, defend your neighborhood. You need to get good at this. Let me try and help you a little bit. That feels in character. It's great to sprinkle him in the movie a little bit. And I felt he was used just the right amount. In fact, my usage of him, my only real issue with the usage of him is that they put too much of it in the trailers, which means they used up too much of his screen time. And I don't like it when you do that. If he's only in the amount of this movie that he's in this amount of this movie, just put about half as much of what they put in the trailers in the movie so that we get to see it and enjoy it in the film, not spoiled in the trailers. I don't like this sort of thing. From there, we'll move on to our main villain in this one, the Vulture, Michael Keaton. One of my earliest movie memories is seeing Batman 1989. Love Michael Keaton. Absolutely love one of my favorite actors. And for years, he kind of wasn't in too much stuff. And so he's one of these actors I talked about. He's one of the great guys that just shows up in stuff every 3 or 4 years. And then he's the scene stealer at every scene that he's in the movie. And then over the last 4 years, we had this big revival of his. And so I've just been so thrilled to see him in a lot more movies than we've seen him, especially now that he's award pedigree type performances. And no exception here. He's great in this movie and brings multiple dimensions to a character that is pretty well crafted, because he's not just this gigantic villain out there to kill everybody. He's not this guy that I'm going to blow up this city. He's just a guy that wants to support his family, that's become so angry and cynical with the way the world's burned him, the way he's been damaged, that he made small choices, and all right, if I'm going to get screwed over by the government, I'm just going to take this. I'm going to do this my own thing. I don't care about the government, and so it takes one small step. And then by the time we get into this movie, there's even a moment in time where he kills someone and just kind of oops, I killed a guy. And just because he takes these small steps down this path to darkness that we see him take inside of this movie. And so I just think the character's wonderfully crafted. And I'm assuming you've seen this movie, so I'm going to spoil some big, gigantic stuff in this movie in 3, 2, 1. And I thought the twists in this movie were great. I didn't see it coming at all. When it happened, I went, oh, this really does work. This makes sense. You have earned this moment in this movie. Why is the deal's happening right around where Spider-Man's at? Why is he eyeballing? How all the pieces fit together. It ties it together. It doesn't feel like a trick. It doesn't feel unearned. And it makes the movie come together so nicely. And you get this great scene where you don't need the Vulture to be in a big suit to be threatening. They're just riding in a car. And it's terrifying what's happening in that sequence. And so this movie, I love the casting in this movie. You can even go down to the other characters, Ned and all the kids at school. They feel like high schoolers. They have a funness of that high schoolers have. They have an activity, a goofiness. all the things you want from high schoolers, the different personality types. They captured high schoolers really well in this movie, I would say, and they tied it into the MCU really nicely. And then last thing I'll talk about on the positives is that this movie's a ton of fun and it's very funny. They kind of nailed the humor in the characters, in the relationships of who they are, and it's a movie about high schoolers that's not meant to be the world's gonna end, who's gonna die. And so they went, let's just have fun. This isn't the biggest movie, but it's one of the more fun movies in the MCU. It's one of the more rewatchable movies in the MCU. Actually, leading up to doing the this series I'm doing right now, I've already watched this movie 3 times this year. And this is in a year where I'm watching a lot of Marvel movies, and so I'm not rewatching any of them. This one just happened to be the one that I either wanted to watch or my kids wanted to watch, and it also works out that for the most part I could show this to my kids. And so I've already seen it 3 times leading up to this week where I need to rewatch it one more time for this review. All that are very big positives for the movie. I did review it when it first came out. Maybe I'll remember to put a card up there. I probably will forget actually, but I have reviewed it before. You can see my thoughts before, and I'm pretty sure they're the same. A ton of fun, great characters, unique story. I love that it was a smaller scale story. From there, let's move on to the negatives. The big thing that comes to mind is Aunt May's pants. She wears the worst pants I've ever seen in my entire life. Every time we rewatch this movie, my wife and I are just like in awe that they put these pants on Marissa Tomei. And like my theory is that she's just too pretty and too hot as an Aunt May that they had to find some way to muck things up a little bit. And so they put her in these ugly pants. But those pants are the worst thing about this movie, without question. Probably not. From there, let's move on to something a little bit more substantial. The movie drags a little bit in the middle section. The nature of the plot of it being that Vulture isn't trying to like blow up a city or something like that means there isn't like this big sense of urgency moving through the movie. It's more kind of Spider-Man's piecing things together, trying to figure out what's going on as the Vulture is being a vulture for these different pieces of technology. And that kind of leads to a situation in the middle of the movie where it feels like we're just kind of like meandering around a little bit. And the whole sequence at Washington, D.C. felt like a pretty big misstep to me. The individual elements to it, the places that they go, the scenes themselves aren't the problem. I thought they worked nicely. The Washington Monument kids and all that I think works. The problem you run into with the movie is it just pulled me out of the movie quite a bit when we have Spider-Man traveling 500 miles to Washington, D.C. when there's an event going on there involving high school students, and then Spider-Man shows up 500 miles away where those high school students are at. It's the sort of thing that just, you can't get away with that sort of thing in the 21st century. Everyone would go, I'm pretty sure someone would figure out what was going on here, that Spider-Man is involved with these high schoolers and tied back. It just, those sorts of things would happen in the 21st century with the information age where you could put all the pieces together. So much easier to do research and discover who's in town. Why is Spider-Man suddenly here? That pulls me out of the movie. But the sequence in general just feels like, wait, why are we in Washington, D.C. now? Why did we leave New York City? This is a little bit odd. Next up, I've never been crazy about the hyper-enhanced Spider-Man suit. I thought that was a pretty big misstep, actually, because it just kind of pulled me out of the movie being like, this doesn't feel right for Spider-Man. Now, I would have actually liked it if it was like a one-off scene or something like that, where Tony Stark's like, here, try out this suit. I've enhanced it, giving you a bunch of stuff. And he tries it, and he's like, oh, I hate this. I don't like this, and gives it back himself. Can you give me something that's just my simple suit again? I think that would have been great. But the idea that Spider-Man's actually into having a Jarvisified Spider-Man suit with computers and changes his voice and all sorts of other aspects to it, it just feels out of place and robs the actual stuff about Spider-Man that makes him unique. So I didn't care for that aspect of the movie at all. When it comes to this movie, I don't have any big issues with it. At the same time, it's a movie I don't feel like trying to knock it out of the fence. It's not a movie with sky-high ambitions where some of the other movies in the MCU are doing so many things with the plot, bringing so many characters together that they're trying to aim high, and maybe they had some issues that brought them down a little bit. This is a movie that's aiming for a double, a triple, and I feel like it gets a double or a triple. And that for me is good enough, but at the same time, it's not a movie I would expect, even at its best, that I would probably give an A+. So if I'm going to score this one, I'd probably give it an A-, and on an entertainment level, I would go an 8.8 out of 10 on the entertainment level. This movie is very rewatchable. It's got a ton of fun characters mixed throughout it, a nice high school take on the MCU, and a movie that brings the MCU together, gives us a new perspective on things from a high schooler's take on it, while at the same time have a very distinct flavor of its own. From there, let's move on to our MCU connections. And this one was a lot of fun for me because I really enjoyed the way this movie tied into the timeline of the MCU. So you kick the movie off, and it takes place right after the movie The Avengers, and Michael Keaton's brought in to do some of the restoration, pick some stuff up. And so as we were watching this, my 5-year-old actually goes, "Dad, is this after The Avengers?" And I was like, "Yes, Liam, this is after The Avengers." He was putting it together. He was figuring out what was going on. He's like, "What's all that stuff? Is that the big monsters or the small monsters?" I was like, "It's both of them. He's trying to grab all of them." So, well, that's really cool. It's like, "Yes, son, that is really cool." And then it moves on to the next one, and we pick up Peter Parker's story, learning about what was his perspective on the days where, or the day where he was in Civil War, and he behaves like a high schooler, and he vlogs the whole thing, and he's putting up cameras to kind of film him while he was out there at the airport. All of it feeling very high schoolery type stuff, and so I had a ton of fun with those connections. Naturally, throughout the movie, we got Happy Hogan as kind of Peter Parker's liaison to Tony Stark. So that was a nice way to bring Happy Hogan into a nice prominent role in a movie without it feeling forced. And it was like in a way that made sense with what they're trying to do. Likewise, we get Robert Downey Jr. in the movie. Also as kind of a background storyline going in this that moves up to the front line in the third act of this. And in the movie, we learn that we're shutting down the tower and moving things upstate. And all this ties back to little nuggets that we've learned all the way going back to Age of Ultron, of just kind of shifts in the change of the world of the MCU, new construction that they've been doing, setting up Avengers bases elsewhere. All sorts of little touches that make sense that this sort of change would be happening. And it ties so nicely into the scheme of our villain. Once again, why I like this movie so much is those little details of how they tied this one in. I really love the way they did all of those little details. Then all throughout the movie, you've got Captain America making multiple appearances in these little safety videos that are so funny. Just so clever the way they did them. And they managed to just kind of work this little line into the movie where someone's like, "Isn't this guy in prison now?" Like, it's such a nice little detail of how someone would actually respond if they were showing this video. You would get the quip, like, "I'm pretty sure this guy's a felon now," and a nice little detail on how things work. In the post-credit sequence, we get a little reference to the Scorpion, kind of get these other kind of characters tying into it. And you get, I'm not even sure exactly what my interpretation is of that scene with the Vulture there and what he's trying to do and what his future plans and schemes are, but it was a really nice little touch the way they did that. And of course, the movie ends with Aunt May discovering who our web slinger is and that he is the web slinger. So a nice little final moment to run the credits on for this movie. Anyway, those are the ones I noticed. There's probably a lot more. I noticed the kind of the big picture because I love the way it tied into it. I didn't keep as close of a list of the small little details in this one as I have on some of the earlier movies in the MCU. I got to do 2 of these this week. It's a busy week for me. With that said, tell me down below in the comment section which ones did I miss, which ones are your favorites of the MCU connections. And from there, we're going to share you guys' take on the movie using the Stardust app. Here's what you guys had to say.
Spider-Man Homecoming is a really, really great surprise movie for me in the MCU.
This movie was so much fun, and it's so rewatchable. I've rewatched it 3 or 4 times. I have an absolute blast with it every single time that I catch it.
I would consider Spider-Man Homecoming to be a great reboot for the new character.
I mean, this was the best Marvel movie in my opinion.
It's a fun movie. It's my favorite of the 6 Spider-Man films for sure. And
I think Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man we've ever seen. He's absolutely fantastic.
Peter Parker, played by Tom Holland, is perfect as Spidey.
We have a stellar cast. Marisa Tomei as Hot on May. Jacob Batalon as sidekick. He is very good.
I think Tom Holland was perfect in Spider-Man, showing what a teenager would really be like if he had superpowers. And I think Michael Keaton was perfect as the Vulture.
Michael Keaton as the Vulture is one of the best MCU villains. Tom Holland is great as Spider-Man, and the movie just as a whole is such a fun time.
They made Peter finally act like he's actually a high schooler and not like he's some 30-year-old guy.
His movie is pretty much a side story, something like Ant-Man, which it's not bad. It's definitely a nice change of pace, but it is a little weird seeing their most prominent hero be a side story.
The comedy is awesome. It's on point. The villain is one of the best MCU villains.
The villain Vulture is really good as well, and I think Tom Holland did a great job with that movie.
And especially Keaton as the Vulture, I never thought I would ever say that. Their interactions with each other were really amazing, but their fight scenes were not as awesome as the other Spider-Man movies.
But I still think it was a little bit overhyped when it first came out. I do love Tom Holland though. The Vulture is great. And I just love the action set pieces in this movie, and Ned is just the best character.
But there's some parts of it that, to me, didn't make it the best Spider-Man film ever.
It's my favorite Marvel film of all time.
So there you have it, a movie that a lot of people loved, had a lot of fun with. A couple people a little bit more lukewarm on it, had a couple issues with some of the decisions they made with the movie, but not a lot of hate for this one because it's a lot of fun. Anyway, if you would like to appear in one of my future videos, it's very simple. All you have to do is download the Stardust app for your phone. I actually have a new phone, so I don't have the Stardust app on this one just yet because I got this phone literally 2 days ago. So actually between right now as I'm filming this thing, this is so meta, I'm going to have to download the Stardust app so I can download your reactions that you just watched a few seconds ago. Yeah. This is so meta what's happening right now. So I'm going to go to home tonight and download the Stardust app for my phone, which you should do as well if you want to appear in a future video. Once you download the app, follow my account. You can see my name down below. Follow me first. That helps me out. It kind of like tracks some things for me, makes them like me a little bit more. And then when you record your reactions using the Stardust app, just mark the little thing in the upper right-hand corner and then type my name in. It tags me in it so it appears in my feeds. I can see that see your pretty face, hear your thoughts on the movie, and share it in one of my future videos. So there you have it. If you want to appear in a future video, just download the app, follow me, and tag me. It's that simple. There you have it. We're almost done with the Journey to Marvel's Infinity War series. We've only got 2 movies left to review before Infinity War. We are so close on this one. And if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button to do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos. Key thing is though, I don't want to just talk about movies, I want to talk about movies with you. So please join me down in the comments section. Let's have a lively discussion about this very fun movie, especially if you're the person that didn't like it. I'd love to hear your take on that one. Keep it a little bit interesting down in there. And as always, thank you for watching.